and welcome to the Empowered Curiosity podcast. Today's guest is HR Mentor Candice Elliott. In today's episode, we are going to talk about what it feels like and what steps you can take to expand your business by hiring a contractor or employee. And as always in this community, we want to make sure that we're doing that in ways that are aligned with the values of you and your business. Candice brings a very different perspective to HR hiring practices because they are at the foundational level, not about extracting work from our employees and our contractors and our colleagues. And rather, it's about creating a mutually beneficial relationship with the folks we work with. In this episode, we're going to be talking about how to know when it's the right time to hire an employee or contractor, how you can shift your hiring process away from traditionally extractive corporate methods to something that feels aligned with the ethics and the foundational principles of you and your business. We'll also share ways in which you can build an outstanding team based on reciprocity and hiring from a regulated nervous system. And we'll share how the ways in which you treat your team and compensate them is really an embodiment of the values and the integrity you want your business to uphold. I'm proud to share that Candice is both an alumni of Business Alchemist Mentorship, and also she is one of the experts that I've asked to share her wisdom within the program. So if you enroll in Business Alchemist Mentorship, you'll get her lesson, which is called My First Aligned Hire. And in that lesson, she shares all the steps in very tangible, very practical ways that are helpful to take leading up to hiring somebody and into that hiring process. That lesson is an excerpt of a bigger course that she has called My First Hire. And she has that up on her website, which is called Fortress and Flourish. I'll put the link down below. So if you're in a place where you are looking to hire somebody and you're not ready to fully invest in the whole program of BAM, go check out her course on her website. This episode, after we recorded it, made me reflect on an earlier episode that I recorded. It feels like a sister episode to episode 100, which is the one that I recorded with my assistant, Alicia. In that episode, she and I talk about how reciprocity, sovereignty, alignment, and safety are the pillars when it comes to building out a secure team. I hope you enjoy this episode that I recorded with Candice. Go check out the one that I did with Alicia as well if this is a topic that feels aligned for you in this moment. And if you're enjoying our chats here on the podcast, I would love to invite you to just take a few moments to give us a rating or review on whatever platform it is that you listen to us on. This is how other folks, other spiritual entrepreneurs can find our work and we can grow our community. Yay! I'm so thrilled that we get to chat with Candice Elliott today. Candice and I have... Go ahead.
I'm so excited to be here.
We were just saying, like, we've been in conversation for a really long time. And I also just want to say that I've been wanting to have Candice on this podcast for a long time. She reached out to me after hearing me on a different podcast, and everything that she was saying, she works in HR, the intentions that she has around working in HR, like all these beautiful foundational pieces that I so deeply resonate with. I was like, yes, I love this woman. And I don't think her work really aligns with my people. But we were having a conversation recently, and we finally found the topic that would work for my particular community of spiritual entrepreneurs who, most of us are solopreneurs. And then a few of us are moving into that space of wanting to hire our first employee or contractor. And so I thought, hey, like, let's just dive into that conversation, because I know that you tend to work mostly with like bigger teams, that you've started to sort of explore that space of what it looks like to hire your first employee. And I think that you've got such a beautiful take on hiring practices and the way we approach work. And we're going to go down so many little rabbit holes. It's going to be a fun conversation.
Yeah, it's going to be awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's funny. I was giving a talk about hiring recently to a group of mostly solopreneurs, and um, they just were kind of confused about having a different perspective around hiring and pay and all these different things, because I think when you think of HR, oftentimes you think of like the man who's going to come like beat you down or throw the rule book at you. And I just feel so grateful that I get to work with people who want to do things in a different way, that are really supporting their communities, their people in a reciprocal relationship.
Yeah. So you've already started to get into it a little bit, but can you describe what that quote unquote different way is so that we have a good foundation to start from in terms of like who and how we want to hire?
Yeah. So when I think I can tell this as a story. So in my own company last year, so I'm a solopreneur and I have 4 or 5 different independent contractors who work for me, depending on what's going on. Um, and I had tried to hire someone previously and it didn't work out. And there's a whole other story there that we can get into. But when I was redoing this, what I wanted to find was a group of people who they love what they do. Like I get to help them do what they love. That I pay them well for their time so that there's a fair exchange between the amount of work that they're doing and then the pay that they're receiving, where we have really clear and consistent communication about what they're doing, what I'm doing, how that all integrates, how all of the work integrates with one another, so that we can all really enjoy. I think the purpose of life is so that we can enjoy the life that we're living. And so creating a work environment where everyone meshes well, where everything works well is integral to that. Um, I think oftentimes, business owners, especially when they get to a larger size of business, if they don't start with this kind of core concept, um, start to feel like people who work for them owe them, and they don't get to take time off because there's like a debt that they're paying back kind of because of the money that they're receiving. And so I really kind of approach it from that different perspective.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that the word that I want to highlight that you said earlier was like reciprocity. Like it has to work for both people. It needs to be healthy and aligned for both people. They're, you know, I love my job and I love that my contractors all love their jobs. And so being able to sort of like build on that is really what we're trying to do. I think for contrast, I want to just share a couple of stories. They're not my stories, but they're stories from my husband who has always worked for big companies. And so when we were living in Las Vegas, he worked as a security officer. And so part of the HR department, one of the strategies that they came up with in order to avoid paying their security guys overtime is it was one club, but they had multiple different business names, legal business names that they were operating under. And so then they would bill for their hours, or they would invoice for their hours under different business names so that, if they worked over 40 hours that week, even though it was technically the same club, they didn't get overtime. And
Yeah.
so there's ways in which the system is trying to exploit workers and employees so that the employer sort of wins out in the end. And right now he's actually in a process. He's gotten a new job as a bus driver, and he's like, through their union they're required to have 10 hours in between shifts so that they can at least sleep.
Yeah.
make sure that they get their 8 hours of sleep. And he just got scheduled for a shift that is just 8 hours apart from each other. So he gets off at like midnight and has to come in at like 8 a.m. And so like he's fighting to have that changed, because again there's that like exploitation piece that I think that a lot of people don't take into consideration. And I mean those are like extreme cases, but I think that that's kind of what our system and society is used to seeing in terms of HR. And
Yeah.
so when you say that there's a different approach, I think that it's not just a conceptually and like tactically different approach. It's like from the foundations and the emotions and the intentions on up, it's a completely different approach. Because if the desire, if the intention is to try to get as much out of workers as possible for as little pay as possible, and that is what makes your business run, that's going to be a very, very different intention to hold. And therefore, all of the actions that come after that are going to align with that intention versus you go into your first hire. And I think it is important to start out with these intentions in your very first hire. Don't wait until you've got 10 people on your team to try to change these sorts of foundational intentions. Is like when you start out with that intention of like, hey, this person is gifting me their energy, their time, their abilities, their experience, their, all of the things that they bring into a job. And so can we then create a system of reciprocity from the beginning so that it's fair and honest and just aligned from the beginning, I think is kind of what you're talking about here. And like they're just like it's easy to sort of like nitpick all the little actions that come afterwards, but it's like it always goes down to the roots.
Yeah. I was reading, Pew Research did a poll recently of Americans and what they think about like hierarchy and division in the workplace. And basically the statistic was 80% of people think that that's going to get worse in the next 20 years. And I really don't want that to happen. I want it. I want to live in a world where we're all supporting each other and we each have enough of what we need, but we're sharing with each other in a way so that we can all grow. So like rising tide lifts all boats.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I mean, I've done a bit of research in the last year about those systems of exploitation in the workplace specifically and kind of how we came to the practices that we have today. And one that comes up a lot in, when you're making your first hire or even, just trying to find someone to do a little bit of work has to do with paying people based on where they live. And
Mm,
if we go back, there's a whole system of capitalism, colonization, and industrialization that came about based on slave labor or very low paid labor,
yeah,
selling goods to places that are, higher income, and then generating basically wealth in Europe.
yeah.
And so, you know, when you're making decisions about how, for example, to pay people, which is one that comes up a bit, like through the process of figuring out who to hire, um, that's a decision that there is to make.
Mm-hmm.
Do you pay relative to where you live, or do you decide to pay relative to where someone else lives? Like, I hired a bookkeeper in Ghana years ago to help me clean up my books for the first tax season, and I paid them what I would have paid someone an hourly wage in the United States.
Mm-hmm.
And I know that that did more for them than it would have done for a person here, but that was a part of this reciprocity. I feel like people who are working for my company should be receiving in the way that, if they were living here, they would be receiving.
Yeah, yeah, I love that. And if I'm thinking back to when I was considering hiring my first employee, I can't remember this woman's name, but you start doing these searches about virtual assistants and, then the
On
algorithm
like
picks up.
Upwork and Fiverr
Yeah.
and yeah.
Yeah. And so then the algorithm starts picking things up. And so there was this coach that kept showing up on my Instagram ads of like hiring basically a virtual assistant in a different country, whether that was from the Philippines or, different countries that don't have the same standard of living as here, and essentially coaching coaches to hire them for $2 to $5 an hour.
Mhm.
Um, and that was like at the very, very beginning of me even considering hiring a coach or a virtual assistant. And that just felt, I can't even, like, to this day, I still can't name like why that feels so wrong in my body, but it felt so wrong in my body.
Yeah.
And the justification is that like the $5 there is going to actually support a living wage, for somebody who lives in Vietnam. And so like that's why we as industrialized nations should be sending money over in that way. And like there was just so much stickiness around that, and I think that like I see the smile. I see you smiling about this, and so I think
Because
you probably have some things to say about this.
it reinforces the system of colonization that has been in place for hundreds of years.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, that's what's achy about it. I've also been in rooms of people where they're really excited about finding someone who will work for $2 an hour, and there's no way that they could run their business without it. And so
Mm-hmm.
that's another kind of side of it, is so how do you create your business in a way that it is generating enough income so that it can really fully support the people who are working for it. And that was a big shift that my business went through last year.
Mm-hmm.
Um, our living wage in Santa Cruz in 2 or 3 years went from $18 an hour to $27 an hour. And
Ouch.
most of the people who work for me now are making around 30 an hour, 30 to 35, and even more than that actually now, that I think about it. But back then it was like everybody was making between $20 and $25 an hour. And so it was a really big shift to like make those changes so quickly.
Mm-hmm.
And so it meant that I had to redesign my business and how it worked. And I had to get a lot better at describing the value that I bring to the people that I do work for.
Yeah.
Um, and then, of course, being in BAM has helped me to even further refine that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I would love to. I feel like what we're talking about here is the crossroads that so many business owners sort of find themselves at. And it's something that I know that you found yourself at. I found myself there last year. And so I think that the motivations of hiring your first employer contractor for most people comes from a place of like, oh, there's so much to do. And like starting to like realize I can't do this all by myself. And so can we talk about like burnout for a second? Because I think that there's a really important story there, so that we as business owners are hiring with these pure intentions of regulation versus scarcity, and to like catch that in ourselves.
Yeah. Yeah. My business came about because of an episode of burnout where I was working for a company at the time, and um, there was just a lot going on, and it was all really stressful. And I had trouble, like, my body couldn't do it anymore, and just decided to like convulsively shake in my car. And like,
Mm.
I literally couldn't keep myself from crying for like an hour and like trying to get my breath under control. And it was really very intense. And I somehow was sent to a psychiatrist, and he was just like, this is normal. Like, this happens to people, you know, you just kind of pick up and go on.
Oh my God. So much cringe.
Yeah. It's like, God. What do you want me to prescribe you some medication? This is just like a one-time thing.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. And I knew that he wasn't the person to help me, right? I mean, ultimately now, like, I have found other resources that help me to live in a way that is more aligned. But at that time I didn't have them. And I was just like, what do I do? Like, I know I can't keep doing this. Like, I know that I want to work for myself again. I had started my first company when I was 23, and we did bus tours in Florida. And then my business partner and I had a disagreement, and it just kind of fell apart there. And so that's how I ended up going to school for human resources, and then becoming a human resources manager for this restaurant group that I was working with. And I was like, I can't. How do I open my own business? And so I actually went away to Mendocino to the art center there, and I did a wood firing workshop. And I was like, wood firing all day and night. This process is really kind of awesome if you're not familiar with it. You have like a big kiln that's outside, and everyone who is participating in the firing loads all of their work into the kiln. There's
pottery
usually
work.
Yeah, pottery work. Thank you. There's usually 7 to 9 people that participate at a time. And then 24 hours a day for the next 5 to 7 days, you're chopping wood and feeding it into this kiln and making this really hot fire. And then there's a day where the kiln rests and everything cools, and then you take it all out. And I love taking like pottery out of a kiln because it makes this like tinkling kind of a sound. It's just magical. It reminds me of fairies. So I was doing this like very artistic, very hands-on, very physical process. And then also kind of like physically working through what was happening to me and my brain, and then creating a business plan. And my business plan has all these quotes in it from like Rumi and Kabir and all these different writers who had influenced me, especially over the course of that year. And so they're still in there. And I just decided to leave. And so that it was a really big transition. And I made a lot of pottery actually in the first years of Fortress and Flourish. But then it started getting busier, right? In Fortress and Flourish, I started getting more clients. And I also became pregnant with my son, Algernon. And I felt this pressure to like do a lot. That I now recognize as like hustle culture and things. And there was a lot of what I was doing at that time that was kind of imitating what other people were doing in the online space that that wasn't fully integrated with what I wanted to be doing. But I think it's a journey to figure out, you know, what your business is all about. And so I knew I couldn't do all of the things on my plate. I was like building a course. It was my first time ever recording a series of videos, like doing transcripts, all these different things. And so I wanted to hire a virtual assistant. And I just hired the first person that I talked to because I just like, I don't know. But my brain stopped working. My hiring brain stopped working. And I just felt like I really wanted to impress this person for some reason. Like I wanted them to think that I was amazing, to want to work with me instead of, the other way around, to, vet them and make sure that they have the skill set that I need in order to actually do the work, and that it'll be a good relationship. So it was even a learning process for me in hiring my first like virtual assistant. And it worked out for a while. And we were able to like split things like in a good way. She started a job at a company anyway, so didn't have as much time to help anymore. But it was, yeah, real learning experience.
So I want to pick through a couple of things that you were sharing,
Yeah.
and sort of frame it, because what I'm hearing, and I know that you're like a nervous system nerd like I am.
Yeah.
And so like if we listen to your story, what I'm hearing is these like states of freeze, of intentional movement, and of hustling. And you know, like going to the psychiatrist and having him say like, what do you like, what do you want? Like, this is normal, this is what humans do. And instead of hearing that and being like, oh, so this is normal, so I should just freeze around it, what I'm hearing is that you took it upon yourself to actually create that physical movement.
Yeah.
And what I love about that is, yeah, pottery is not necessarily, you know, a part of your work as a human resources consultant, but moving your body, and like I know that pottery can be a physically like really intentional process. Physically moving your body helped you solve that problem of like, what do I do with work? You
Yeah.
know, and it's something that actually my horse trainer has told me is, if a horse is moving their feet, they are problem solving. And so, like, I think humans are the same, is when we shut down, we have decided that that's just a problem that's going to have to exist in my life. And when we go into that freeze state, it's like, okay, I have no answers. So let me just stay here in this state of like incapacity. So for folks who are listening, who feel guilty about maybe putting some time, intention, energy, money into that side thing that brings you joy, you know, like hearing Candice's story of, here's a problem that existed in the work world, here's something that helped her feet get moving, and you know, energy is energy, and that helped the flow of you finding a solution to your work problem, which ultimately was about leaving, you know, like you needed to leave in order to solve that problem. So just wanting to like highlight and acknowledge that, like, that was just some really, really beautiful nervous system like work, whether you knew that was happening or not at the time, like that was actually you regulating your nervous system.
In hindsight, I can see it, and I think I knew that it was happening when I was doing it.
Mm-hmm.
I think for me, art and music have always been a place where I find flow, and it's, and you know, walking in nature too, hikes, but where I'm not consciously working on a problem, but it will work itself out, and it's as if I'll have insights about it rather than having to like make my brain figure it out.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and pottery specifically was helpful for me to learn to slow down,
Mm-hmm.
because it's a lengthy process to go from, I mean, if you start with, you know, clay that you wedge, you have to get it, you know, into the right, like, um, condition to throw, and then to separate out all of those pieces into pieces that are thrown. I wheel throw pottery, and then to let them sit and dry for an amount of time, and then you go back and you trim them. And then if you're going to do any decoration on them, it usually happens at that time. And then they're fired for the first time. And then you do glaze, and then you fire them for a second time. And so it can take like the shortest amount of time is like a week from start to finish, but it can take months and months to get a piece
Yeah.
from clay form to final. I mean, I've had pieces that are unglazed that have been fired that are just waiting for the right time to go in a kiln.
Mm-hmm.
And so it helped me to learn a slower pace,
Mm-hmm.
um, and timing, and that waiting can make things more special.
Mm.
Um,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
yeah.
Yeah, I feel like that's something that's like a lesson that we all can learn as entrepreneurs. We all want to, you know, be successful, quotation marks, in the ways that society deems to be successful, like just right off the bat. And I think that there's this illusion, particularly in the online coaching space, where like it seems like people just like overnight turn into these like 6 figure, 7 figure bajillionaires who are, doing handstands in Bali. Like, and what I have found in terms of like my own business and mentoring other people in their businesses is that process of refinement and waiting and allowing and being in co-creation with your business. Like, it is not a process that can be rushed without having some sort of repercussions in the end, you know
Yeah.
and it's one of these things where I think that if we can relate it back to your process with pottery, it's like you can have this like idea in your mind of what you want that finished product to look like, and there's like a result in mind. And like, we don't know what conditions are going to come up between the idea forming in your head and then the actual thing being completed and finished. And so if we can have that kind of grace and surrender and, as you said it so beautifully, like ability to like slow down and enjoy each part of the process, it becomes a more special and meaningful piece for you. Um,
Yeah, I think it allows what you have learned to be integrated into the work that you're doing.
mhm,
Because
mhm,
if you just rush through a project or a kind of a program that you've developed and you don't give yourself the time to iterate on it, it's never going to be as um, meaningful for you or for your business or for your clients as if you do that work of going back. And I see how you do that in your programs of like
mhm,
refining over time and asking, what makes sense for me to be doing versus other people, what is
mhm.
most aligned for me, what's most aligned for others.
Yeah, yeah. And it's one of it actually came up in our group call, not with your group yesterday, but in the evening call that I had right after yours, in BAM, is this idea of like this. I feel like if there's a through line for all the people who come through BAM, it's we are all trying to help people get closer to themselves so that the particular niche that you're in, air quotes niche, is kind of like the byproduct of that self-reflective work. And so, for example, like, we had a creativity coach on the call last night, and her work is about helping people get more and more in touch with their true version of themselves, and then the writing is just a lovely byproduct of them being in touch with themselves. I think that in your work, the more and more people can get in touch with themselves, they start to see the ethics of what's right or wrong in their business. And so then the HR policies are a byproduct of that work that they've done, and with BAM, yeah, like I love this part of BAM, which is like you guys are at like the last month and a half or so, because everyone's businesses look so different.
it's wild to see how much things have changed, you
Right?
know?
And it's
Yeah.
like, if we had all gone in with this like very rigid idea of like, this is what I want my business to look like. And so I can teach you all the ways in which you can emulate and mimic my business, but it wouldn't be your business,
Hmm.
you know? And so, like, if we can release this idea of like, it needs to look a particular way and the result needs to be this exact picture, and allow for that co-creative process with the universe, with your intentions, with what's happening in the world. Just allow that to be a part of the conversation. Each one of us ends up with a business that's really, really drastically different from each other's. And we need that difference. We need biodiversity in businesses so that, you know, each of our businesses becomes an expression of who we are individually. And if we're uniquely ourselves, then our business also needs to be uniquely itself as well.
Yeah. And the way that you bring on support to help too can be so unique to your business. I mean,
Yes.
I think that with everyone that I'm working with right now, we've gone through a lot of different versions of what that work looks like and changed it over time to better fit all of our needs. And I mean, I think at least when I work with bigger companies, there's this like, okay, we need to have this sales department and we need to have this like customer service and that, you know, it's like there's a mold of what you're supposed to fit into. And with solopreneurs, oftentimes it's like, I need to get a VA first or whatever it is. And my path looked a little different from that. I hired a nanny first because that was, or no, I think
Yeah.
I hired people to help clean my house first. Honestly, that was like
Mm.
the first layer of support where I was like welcoming in the work of other people to help ultimately help like my business and my family.
Mm-hmm.
And then Megan, our nanny, to help take care of my son so that I would have time to dedicate. And then it was like finding a copywriter and a virtual assistant to support the business, and then a bookkeeper. And
Mm-hmm.
so it can look kind of different ways depending on what the person's like what your own needs are.
Yeah, I love that. I love that, like, you bring in that, your first hire doesn't have to be a virtual assistant or a bookkeeper. It can be, somebody who helps out with, some of the things that you just need time to be able to devote to your business.
Yeah.
And I also want to circle back to what you said earlier, which is like your hiring brain stopped working.
Oh yeah.
And like, and I love that because it's like the hiring brain stopped working and you're an HR person,
Yeah.
right? And so, like, to me, like, this is where the importance of nervous system regulation comes into play. Is it doesn't matter how much you technically know as an HR person. You went into a fawn state when you were thinking about hiring this virtual assistant. And so, like, I think that this is why nervous system regulation is so, so, so crucial and so important is being able to slow things down enough and integrate it enough so that when you do hire, it comes from a state of abundance rather than from scarcity.
Mhm.
And for me, what that looked like, and for anybody who's curious, I did an entire podcast episode with Alicia, who is my assistant. And we went through the entire process of why I hired her, and what my intentions were, what kind of safety nets I had to put in place before I could hire her so that my nervous system felt regulated through the hire. I think that it's important to set up your business. I want to say set it up for success, but really ultimately, like, I think what I mean to say is set it up for regulation.
Mhm.
Hmm. Yeah. And so if anybody feels that sense of like dysregulation when it comes to hiring their first employee or contractor, like even Candice, who like did this for a living, like she got dysregulated when it came to her own business, and it's nothing to be ashamed of. It's nothing to be like, you know, to like hide about anyone's story. It's like when we are able to name these things, we're able to actually find ways to support ourselves. And so I'm curious for you, Candice, you know, in that state of dysregulation, um, versus now knowing a lot more about the nervous system, how would you hire somebody differently? Like just like straight up advice for somebody who's thinking about their first hire.
Yeah. Um, I think the first thing is just looking at your own workload. Like, what are all the things that you're doing right now? And not just in your business, because the work that you do in your home can be related to time, and time is something that you need in order to do your own work. And so what are all the things that you're doing? I'm about to go on maternity leave, so I'm doing this again right now. Like, what are all the things? Um, and and then to go through and think about, okay, this is what I'm doing with my day to day. What are my dream things? What do I really want to be doing that's maybe not on this list already, or I keep trying to fit it onto this list? Um, and then try to decide what are the things that you need to be doing. Like, you have to be the one who does it, versus what are the things that other people can do, and how
Mhm.
can you bring in support to help.
Mhm.
So it could look like having someone read through your emails and tell you which important ones you need to respond to. It could be it could be automating something. Like, I use Calendly for all of my appointments, so I don't have to do the back and forth of like this time or that time. I just send someone a link. Um, so there's a combination of like tools that can be helpful, and then, you know, the support of real humans and people.
Mhm.
And I think part of that is having people that you can bounce ideas off of, because that back and forth really, at least for me, helps me to become clearer about what I'm doing and what I want to be
Mhm.
doing.
Yeah. And it also gives you maybe some ideas that you hadn't thought about before. It's like one of the things that I really value in my friendships with, other entrepreneurs is, my friend Lindsay Lockett and I were constantly texting each other and being like, "Hey, does this make sense? Like,
Yeah.
can you read this sales page for me and tell me where I need to clarify?" Like things like that that other people in who aren't in entrepreneurship aren't necessarily going to be able to see quite as clearly, because they just have a different lens. And I think that this conversation is like reinforcing for me like why I've asked you to teach one of the lessons in my program is is because you come into this concept that can be actually quite emotional for people of hiring their first employee or hiring their first contractor, and you recognize all the nuances of it instead of just approaching it from this like, this is how you do it, here's a 1099 versus a W-9, and here's what the difference is between an employee versus a contractor is like we can Google any of those things. um
Yeah.
but like what you're bringing into the conversation is like this nuance of, you know, it's understandable that this is a personal thing for you. It's understandable for me. Like the hardest part of hiring Alicia was not like teaching her how to do the skills of being my assistant. It was like actually unclenching like the grasp that I had around all these tasks that I had unknowingly like identified as just being like a part of who I am.
Yeah.
And it's a process. Like she's been on the team for a little over a year now. It's a process that I'm still working on. She is always on this side being like, okay, I'm available. Like, what else can I take off of your plate? And during staff meetings, she's actually started to chime in and being like, hey, like I can do that.
Mm-hmm.
Because I don't always see it. Like I don't always see the things that I can be taking off of my own plate. Um, and so knowing that it is an emotional process for folks for whatever reason, for me, it happened to be around this struggle that I've always had around control. Um, and and then you also bring in the like technical, like actual HR nuts and bolts types things. So yeah, you're going to be recording that in just a couple of weeks with me. And I'm so glad that I get to have that as part of the core curriculum for BAM. And hopefully this turns into a bigger workshop at some point, but we'll wait until after your maternity leave is done for that to happen.
Yeah, I'm so excited to be able to help. I think to go back to your question about like what is different between being in a dysregulated state to being in a more regulated state. I'm not going to say I'm never dysregulated.
Yeah.
Is it is about alignment. Like it is about, because in the dysregulated state, I was still doing that, like, okay, what makes sense for someone else to do? What all is on my plate kind of thing. But looking at that through the lens of like, what is my Tao? So my Tao is power, and what's my not Tao, and how do I do the things that are more aligned for me and not
Mm-hmm.
do the ones that aren't? And it could be
Mm-hmm.
that the ones that don't happen just don't actually belong anymore.
Mm.
And that's an interesting, like, weeding through kind of
Yeah.
process. But
Yeah, that's
yeah,
beautiful.
I find, I mean, for myself too, in that time, I had like control, like I wanted to control all of every piece of what this person was doing, which was not good for them.
I don't think it's good for either of you.
Or good for me. Yeah. And I had an identity that was like wrapped up in everything that I
Absolutely.
was doing. And the more, I think it's like, I think there's this word titration, right? You just do a
Mm-hmm.
little bit of like what you feel comfortable with, and then you can pull it back. And so, with bringing on a new person to help, maybe it's just little pieces that you start with, and then you add more as time goes on. And if something doesn't work, you can pull it back,
Yeah.
like, and you can hand over something else.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah. And I think that the regulation piece there, even after you've hired your first person, whoever that is such an important piece to also keep your finger on the pulse of, because for me, um, something that I've had to learn how to do is to communicate with Alicia. Like, this
Mm-hmm.
has nothing to do with you. This is like me. I need to like work through my own control shit here. Like, I know that you're fully capable. And so like that eases her nervous system. And she's had a history, and she's shared on the podcast before, of like she's had a history of feeling like, oh, why is that employer holding that away from me? Do they think that I'm not doing a good job? Is there something
Mm-hmm.
about my work that they're not happy about? And so like having that clear line of communication between Alicia and I, where it's not easy for me to admit, like I'm still working on my control shit here, and it has nothing to do with her work ethic. None of it has to do with her. And so I think that that helps with the co-regulation, I would say, between, folks who are working together on a team. And, you know, I find it interesting because, and I think that just to like throw the seed out there for folks who are listening, Candice and I have started talking about a workshop probably next year
Mm-hmm.
of doing like human resources, but then also bringing in a lens of human design. I'm studying human design right now.
I'm so
And
excited for this.
and I think it's so interesting because when I look at my team, um, the without really knowing human design, I have, because I like hired folks in regulation and from a state of like, okay, so here are my real needs. our charts are really like beautiful. Like we fill in the holes for each other. So like for example, I have an undefined root. Root energy is like the like the starter on your gas stove, right? It's like the like charge that like gets that project going in terms of like work. And I've always found it really hard. Like I have all these ideas and I always find it really hard to actually put those ideas into motion. Once there's some momentum in it, because I have a defined sacral, I can get that thing going. And then I also have a defined heart, which is like the thing that gets the project over the finish line. And
Mm,
so for me, undefined root, which means it's hard for me to get projects going, defined sacral, and defined heart. And Alicia has that defined root. And so it's interesting because I just brought a potential offering to the table to the team a couple weeks ago. And just talking to her, like, got my own root excited about this project, you know?
yeah.
Like she was able to be like, okay, so what needs to happen in order for this to get started? These are the ways in which we can structure the program. These are the things that we've seen working in BAM, and what can we bring into that program so that it, we're learning from BAM, but also like letting go of some of the things that didn't work in BAM. And
Hmm.
so like having her sort of be that starting engine for me like has been just unbelievably like such a big investment that I didn't even realize I was making when I hired her. Um, and so like I want to be able to like look at teams in that way and also give spiritual entrepreneurs like a place that we can look at their chart and be like, okay, so these are the things that you do really well. And so when you're going out there and hiring your first employee, like these are the things that you need support with. And so let's ask interview questions in such a way that you can, actually screen for those people.
Yeah. Yeah. It's so this is something that I have been thinking about for a really long time, actually, is like how human design um, wisdom can be a part of building teams. Because there are a lot of different kinds of like personality tests that are used in the workplace all the time to try to help with communication, and I've taken a lot of them. But for me personally, understanding my own human design has helped me to know what is in alignment for me or not, what feels correct or not. I'm a generator. So um, when I start to get a feeling of frustration, I'm like, oh, okay, this isn't in alignment for you. Like, let's
Mm-hmm.
try something different. Like, what is that thing that
Mm-hmm.
feels good? Um, and I just see so much potential for how this can help teams to work and grow together. And
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. And, I just want to throw like a shout out there to my human design teachers. They're Nadia Last and Samantha Fotenhauer, and they run a really, really great program. So if anyone out there is interested, I'm happy to put the link to their work down below. Um, they also have some great podcast episodes that they've done together, and to me, like this human design work is it feels less like prescriptive. Like I feel like sometimes we can get into some of these like personality type testing and like astrology readings, and it's like it almost feels like it takes the autonomy out of somebody's like decision making,
mm-hmm.
just in terms of like, hey, this is what the planets are doing, so you should do it this way. And the thing that I find really lovely about human design is that it feels really permissive. Like, here's an explanation of maybe some things that you've not even been able to put like a voice to. And so instead of just getting blocked and stuck and frustrated about that thing, can we help you sort of like redirect your energy in a way that actually works with who you are fundamentally.
Mm-hmm.
So, as y'all can probably imagine, Candice and I have like so many things that we want to talk about and share, which is why I had kind of teased it a little bit earlier of like she's teaching a workshop for BAM members. And if you can go over just like a brief overview of what we're going to cover in that. So, like, yeah, you only get access to this workshop with Candice if you're in BAM, but in the future, she and I are going to be doing a separate workshop that we're going to open up to the public.
Yeah, well, I definitely want to start out with, learning from the group what is coming up, what the challenges are that are coming up around potentially hiring someone or their own work and workload and that piece of it. And I'll give practical steps, like the steps that I already knew as an HR person to figure out what the job looks like, how to interview people, how to create a style of interviewing that feels good to you, that isn't just like asking a person a whole bunch of questions and having it feel weird. And then a couple options for how to bring people on to your team. So either as an independent contractor or as an employee. And I think that having like you were talking about, having a runway, like a gentle way of bringing people on and a trial period to see how it's working, not in like a let's test this person and activate everybody's nervous systems around it, but like let's figure out how to create that on ramp so that everyone's successful, and so that if it isn't the right fit, then we know early on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's great. And for those folks who may want to look you up, can you talk a little bit about some of the work that you do for teams as well as for solopreneurs, and then let us know how we can find you?
Yeah. So the best way to keep in touch with me is through my newsletter. And we'll put the link to that in the show notes. It has all the updates on what's happening in my company, Fortress and Flourish, and then my podcast, The Hearth, and then also just personal updates, which I'm sure will happen over the summer as my next baby comes in to the world. And when I work with companies that are a little bit bigger, it's primarily through my program that I developed in BAM, which is called Let's Lead Together. And it's a year-long program where we work on developing a leadership pipeline, like a way for people to grow through mentorship in your organization. We do a whole bunch of HR compliance stuff. So we get your handbook and job descriptions and compensation plan all updated. And then we do leadership sessions. So one-on-one sessions between me and the CEO or executive director. I work with both for-profit and nonprofit organizations. And so those are really focused on, the areas where you're feeling the need to grow, where you feel like you're stuck, and helping you to get to the next kind of step for you and for your business. Yeah. And then I do human resources mentorship. So for people who are new to the field of human resources, I have a mentorship program that is just like one-on-one sessions. And it's really, being new to HR is really intimidating. And because there is so much like structurally that is forced on the role, it can be difficult to navigate your personal ethics and choices and decisions with what you have to do in this job. And so it's to help people with that transition.
Yeah, I really want to send my husband's new employer to you, because I'm like, yes, there's something going on here that y'all aren't getting. Like, people need more than 6 hours of sleep in between shifts.
Yeah, send all the people, all the exploitive companies to me.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then I'm working on a course for solopreneurs that is to help with that first hire. So
Yeah.
I'm not sure when it'll be coming out, but sometime.
Yeah. And so
Yeah.
if we're subscribed to your newsletter, then we'll get first dibs on that, I'm assuming.
Yep, exactly.
Yep. Sweet. And website and Instagram handle, all the ways that people can find you, please.
Yeah, so my website is fortressandflourish.com. And Instagram handle is at Fortress and Flourish. And then LinkedIn, because HR and LinkedIn go hand in hand, but it's just Candice Elliott, and you'll find me there.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much for having this conversation with me. I always love chatting with you, and it's one of those things where I feel like there needs to be trauma-informed practices in every aspect of how we do work. And I don't know, hitting it from the HR point of view feels like a very efficient way to like infuse that into a company. So thank you for the work that you do, and thanks for being a part of my community.
Yeah, happy to be. Thank you so much for having me today.